Good evening. Welcome to the general meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission. This is Thursday, July 10th, 7:30 p.m., Brisbane City Hall. Call to order.
Commissioner Cunningham?
I am present.
Commissioner Doe?
Present.
Commissioner Munir?
Here.
Commissioner Parker?
Here.
The records show Commissioner Reinhardt is absent.
Okay, we move on to the adoption of the agenda.
I motion that we adopt the agenda.
A second.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, we move on to the consent calendar, and on the consent calendar is the approval of the draft action minutes of the March 13th, 2014 regular meeting. Any comments?
I have no comments. No comments.
No edits.
No comments. So I move that we approve the draft action minutes of March 13, 2014.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next, we move on to oral communications. And as there is nobody in our audience this evening, we have no oral communications. Written communications, what I have in front of me, and it looks like there's actually a lot of things on people's desks. So I hope we have all the same written communications. Department of Toxic Substance Control in Berkeley has sent out an item relative to the June 17th, 2014 Brisbane Baylands Community Advisory Group meeting.
It was very good.
Any chance that we can actually get these pre-mortem rather than post-mortem? I don't know why we get these like a month later. I mean, there's no point. It would be really nice if we could get these and bring them up at a meeting before the meeting.
Agreed. I'm not sure why this is coming in so late. I think you all should actually get these in your mailboxes at home, too, so hopefully you're on the list.
I do not.
You do not? Okay.
No, I do not.
Neither do I.
We didn't receive any of that.
So I think we could probably contact DTSC and have them add
Right.
you to your home mailing.
Well, and interesting, I was on the original group way back when, 1,000 years ago, and I was on the Brisbane Baylands Community Advisory Group on the chair, not the chair, I was part of the group back then, and I did, but I don't get anything, and who's paying for this?
It's a non-profit. No one's paying for it.
Somebody's paying for it.
Well,
These are printed items, so this is
The chair, the property owner provides some minimal funding to DTSC to support the administrative function of the CAG.
Okay, it's not working very well. If we're getting something about a meeting that was June 17th and it is today July 10th.
I agree. So we'll work on that.
All right, that would be great. The next piece of mail that I have is the 18th Annual Indicators for a Sustainable San Mateo County, Spring 2014, Transportation Connecting the Last Mile. Has anybody got any comments on that, by the way?
no.
Okay. And on common ground.
Other than the fact that you look at the chart about how children get to school in United
I
States.
can't hear you. If I can't hear you, I'm sure.
I said if you look at the chart where it says how children get to school in United States 1969 versus 2009, and you can tell that in 2009 we have 45% versus 12% in 1969. So more people dropping their children by car, which is a reverse trend that we're not looking for that. We want more people to use, less people to use car. So it's a reverse trend.
Great. And then I have the On Common Ground, Our Environmental Future from the Realtors and Smart Growth Summit 2014. Does anybody have anything else?
No.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. All right, then let's move on to the study session. 2015 to 2022 Housing Element Update Study Session number 5, Part 3. Chapter 3, Land Inventory and Identification of Adequate Sites for Regional Housing Needs, and Appendix F, Housing Sites Inventory, Opportunity Sites for Residential Development. Tim,
Yes,
is this yours?
thank you.
Oh,
I'll take
Ken,
this
that's yours. Thanks.
We may share a little bit.
Thank you.
but This is part 3 of the Planning Commission's series of study sessions on the housing element on identification of adequate housing sites to meet the RHNA. The Planning Commission undertook parts 1 and 2 of these study sessions in April and June. And actually, I'm going to dim the lights a bit here. In April, the Commission provided direction to staff for the recommended site selection to accommodate the RHNA with the proposed NCRO 3 and R4 areas, and for completeness considered some other alternative sites in June. The RHNA requirements, both carryover and current, are highlighted here on the slide. As a reminder, to meet the RHNA, the city needs to provide 225 housing units, and no more than 50% may be in mixed use. So that slide shows 293, but the difference of 293 and 225 is what the city already has as potential. So the rezoning portion is 225. During the June meeting, after considering alternative sites, the Commission indicated their desire to focus on housing sites close in to central Brisbane. The Commission also requested that staff provide examples of different densities in the range of 20 to 40 units per acre, as well as information regarding traffic impacts. To address the Planning Commission's density question, a table and map were provided in your agenda report, which outlined all the sites developed in the R3 and NCRO2 districts with densities of 20 units per acre or more. A few of those sites were also highlighted with some further development details, and I'll run through them quickly here to follow. Also, just as a reminder, the intent in looking at these sites is not to critique the architecture, but is really to look at how the densities appear in terms of bulk on the ground. So we have half a dozen different slides here on the example sites in the density ranges that we're looking at. So these were just highlighted out of those 33 different sites that were identified. And I have them in order of density here. So this one is 418, 420 Monterey Street. It has a density of 21 units an acre. It's only a 2-unit site, and it's mixed use with Melissa's Taqueria behind it. Melissa's, because of the separation, is calculated as a separate entity, so the density is just looking at the residential portion.
So I have a question about this, and this includes the open space, like the backyard, or there is no backyard?
It includes a small backyard behind.
Okay.
The second one here is at the corner of Santa Clara Street and San Bruno Avenue. This density is 24 units an acre, and it's a triplex. The living space for the units range from about 1,200 to about 1,300 each, plus a total of 6 garage spaces. And as you can see, it goes from 1 story up to 3 stories. 30 to 50 Mariposa Street has a density of 25 units an acre, and this is also a triplex. And its units average about 1,400 each unit, and it has an additional 5 garage spaces. So I'm not calculating garage space in that 1,400 on any of these when I refer to its square footage. It's just the living space. It's accessed from behind this view. This side is 2 stories. On the back side is 3 stories, which that 3rd story is the basement garage level. This one you'll recognize, of course, it's 60 Plumas. This is one that went through design permit last fall. It's in the building permit application stage right now. It's 3 units with a density of 26 units an acre, and the living spaces range from about 1160 to 1230, roughly, and that has 6 garage spaces. Bumping up a ways in density now is Visitation Gardens. This is so we have 39 units an acre. This is the seniors' apartment. And this, I should note, these were built as 100% affordable, so they range from moderate to very low income. And it's really technically a mixed use. It includes common area. It also includes an office space. So you have smaller units than you might have otherwise. And so this ranges from 574 to 708 square foot.
Can you explain that to me a little bit better, please? I've always looked at this particular property as being residential only, but that's not true.
It really is for all intents and purposes, it's residential only, but it has an office there that's essentially the management office.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
and it has common space, internal common space, aside from the outside yard areas, which it also has, which most apartment buildings would not have that kind of feature. So it's a little bit of a different
Right.
animal.
So if we take this particular property and look at it relative to other properties in this discussion, does this model apply to other properties in our discussion or not?
I included it because it's in that density range, and I think you can, there are some takeaways. You have a pretty high density, almost 40 units an acre, and it's only 2 stories. And it includes parking, off-street parking. So I think there's some things you can take away from this. I think, the architecture it's got good articulation, and, there's some merits to this, although we're not really getting into architecture again at this time. But so yeah, I thought it was instructive. The next one here I'll show you, I think, is a little bit more on point. And that one's also, this is more truly a mixed use, and that's the one San Bruno Avenue. That has a density of 44 units an acre. It has 15 units ranging from 817 to just over 1,200 square feet. It has also ground floor commercial space of 3,700 square feet, plus 30 parking spaces behind that commercial space. So it's accessed. It has the benefit of 2 frontages, so the parking can be accessed from both San Francisco and San Bruno Aves. And it's 2 stories as you see it here, and then as I'm sure you're all aware, it bumps up to 3 stories in the back part.
Now, this has no open space.
It has a roof deck, essentially, and then balconies, which are private open, but no, there's not a yard space. So, again, this is a higher density, 44 units an acre, plus it's got the commercial, so we're looking at mixed use, which if you say took that component out of the picture, maybe you can squeeze some yard space in, or if you went higher than this, of course, then you can keep that similar density, and you have the benefit then of allowing for more yard space that way too. So.
Okay, you have any questions? I have a couple of questions on this.
Well, go ahead.
The parking at this particular property is private or somewhat public based on the fact that that downstairs property is commercial? So what's the parking deal there?
The parking in the garage is private parking, and Tim, this was your project, so you may correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's my understanding. And then this, of course, it has street parking for the commercial space, much like, well, just like the rest of the NCR02 district does. So,
Tim, can you add to that, please?
Sure, there are assigned parking spaces to each unit, including the commercial units,
And that's within the building?
in the garage, correct.
Okay.
So presumably employees would be parking in the garage, and any customers to the retail would be using the on-street parking. With the frontage that the property has, there's quite a bit of on-street parking available.
Okay. Thank you.
so just I had a little bit more discussion in the agenda report, but just highlighting a few takeaways from this is we had 33 sites in these two districts, ranging from 21 to a high of 103 units an acre. That 103 unit per acre site was the former Alamond Hotel site that was converted, and it has no parking on site. It does have essentially 50% of the site is in rear yard space, so there is, it's not a total lot line to lot line development, but the units are fairly small as it was developed as a hotel as well. So there's a couple others that are in the 80 unit range, and that's 34 Visitation and I think it was 35 San Bruno Avenue, which are essentially identical buildings. Then generally the sites are smaller than the state requires. The state requires a minimum of 16 units per site at that minimum 20 unit per acre density. And given the small sites within central Brisbane, most all of the actual unit numbers were under the state's requirement. I'll add to that, though, there is a block of sites, I mentioned this in the staff report, on the upper end of San Bruno Avenue and connecting up to Thomas Avenue, where you have a series of sites that have a fairly high density, and so that's interesting to look at if you had a chance to go out and visit any of those. The individual living spaces generally range from about 800 to 1,300 square feet in those highlighted sites, and that's excluding the Visitation Gardens one. And parking, of course, generally constituted the first floor of most of these. So then jumping to traffic, potential traffic impacts were raised as a question by the Commission, and traffic studies based on actual proposed projects would be required as part of the CEQA review prior to approval of a project. This comparison is based on ITE, or Institute of Transportation Engineers, manual for trip generation estimates, and essentially it takes the rate for the what's they classify as industrial park, and take that combined with the building size to get a estimated peak vehicle trips, and that's in the afternoon. The peak would be considered afternoon, and then extrapolating from that, in that last column there is essentially the number of residential units for vehicle trips equivalent to the existing commercial. So if you take that number of trips translated into how many units of residential you could have for the same number of vehicle trips, that's what that final column shows. So on the NCR02, or excuse me, 3 district proposed 117 units, housing units, would generate the same number of vehicle trips as the commercial existing under, these comparison numbers. Jumping down to the R4, you have 191 units would be comparable for vehicle trips. So that's what this chart is trying to show. And finally, I provided some, these weren't in your staff report, but you have them on your desk. There's 4 different scenarios. And what I thought we'd do is we'll walk through these. I also have them set up on the desk here, and so we can take a view of all 4 of them side by side during the discussion part. But these were to try to give a sense of different scenarios that the Planning Commission might consider. The third scenario essentially is what's already been on the table as the NCR03 in our 4 districts. This first slide here, scenario A, is showing a bit more of an extreme, if you will, density. Not really too extreme, but it's 45 units an acre concentrated on 2 sites to accommodate the RHNA. So that essentially what I was doing is looking at, okay, what's kind of in the density range of what we've been talking about, and if you consolidated that to a minimal number of sites to give you more flexibility with the rest, how would that look in terms of density? And so it came out to 45 units an acre. And what that would do is essentially allow the rest that you see in yellow to still be rezoned, but to a mixed use, and could still include housing, but not have to specify a minimum density. And so it frees the city up to essentially have the best fit that really meets both market demands and the city's needs. And we'll come back to all these again. The second scenario is...
Can I stop you before we go into the
Sure.
second one? Anybody else want to ask a question before we move on to the second slide? So, based on what you just said, does that mean that we would have higher
heights.
right
Yes.
there? What does that mean in your world?
I think we'd be looking at 4-story heights on those 2 sites.
Could you possibly be thinking of even higher?
I think you could. You currently have a 50-foot height limit in this zoning district. So if you maintain that 50-foot height limit, I could imagine, the trade-off then is that it would allow for more either larger units or more yard space or a combination of that. So yes.
Okay, so scenario A could potentially propose up to how many stories?
I wouldn't see more than 5 stories being accommodated within 50 feet
Okay,
if you maintain the current height limit
okay.
that it has.
I have a question. In Crocker Park, there's nothing that's 5 feet,
50 feet.
50 feet.
The
Is that correct?
Expeditors building, as I recall.
Is that 50 feet?
Is that- yeah, I think it is. I think it's,
It is 50 feet.
yeah.
That's fairly way out, right?
That is. That's kind of in the,
one.
it's at the crossroads of Valley Drive
Okay.
and South Hill Drive.
Okay, right, yes, got it.
The hatched area just to the north of Park Lane is, and this carries through with all 4 of the scenarios, is essentially these are the sites that are in immediate proximity to what we're talking about rezoning, and so the commission, this goes to the policy that we mentioned, I think, in the last meeting about essentially adding that to the housing element to say consider and I have the wording later here, we can go to that, but essentially consider zoning amendments to other sites that are potentially impacted due to their close proximity. And so in this case, it might be an overlay district, essentially where it keeps that TC1 zoning, but the heavier commercial uses might be restricted, such as maybe freight forwarding, or I don't know. So it'd be for future discussion. So then jumping to scenario B, this is at 33 units an acre, and it would include then all three of those Park Lane sites, and that is comes up to 227. So again, we're just over, at this point, just over the minimum. And I should note on both of these, you have, obviously it's all residential only, so the 50% mixed use is not a concern to meet the state standards. These both would meet the state standards. So in this case, you'd still have the potential and for mixed use rezoning for those other sites that we've called the NCRO 3, as well as the existing NCRO 1 could be considered as a whole. The NCRO 1 is the Brisbane Village and Bank of America site. So, I think we'd want to look at all those holistically. And I should mention also the post office site. It may be considered as a separate site, potentially as a continuation of the zoning along Visitation Avenue with NCRO 2. Modify that zoning to include post offices, so it's because the post office does serve a good use there. We heard that before pretty strongly.
Oh, yeah. Do we have any restrictions relative to the post office from a federal perspective? I mean, can we move the post office if we thought it was a good idea, or how does that work?
So just a lease.
Oh, okay. So if we found them a better site and in this mix, that would be okay. Because I know everybody thinks it's great, and it's not just locally people love the Brisbane post office. I mean, people come from all around. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think the idea with that would be to probably preserve the post office use, but restrict redevelopment of that site to become, we don't want to just leave it to become any kind of warehouse kind of use.
No, right.
Obviously. So scenario C is 20 units an acre across the board now here, and this is essentially what we've been discussing in the last couple of meetings. The NCRO 3 district is now shown with the red highlighted. It's I should note that the density that was included before was 24 units an acre. It's reduced here to be 20 units an acre, and it still meets the requirements. 24 units an acre was really a carryover from the previous housing element, where at that time, the numbers were being worked around, and 24 was the number that we needed to meet the RHNA. So we've reduced it here in this scenario. And then the Brisbane Village and B of A are essentially separate and could be considered for rezoning, of course, as well, but not shown as housing in this. Mm-hmm. And then the last scenario, D, includes essentially is the same as the last one, but also encompasses the Brisbane Village and Bank of America site. So that's the different scenarios. I could put all four on the screen at once if that's a help, and for the Planning Commission's discussion on these.
I don't know if it's beneficial to us. I think it might be beneficial to anybody who might be viewing from home. But is it better for them to see one at a time? I don't know.
We could switch back and forth if
There you go. Okay. Okay. Discussion.
More inclined towards the first one, number A, with a higher density.
Why?
So,
Because the state's going to want more and more and more.
Okay.
so they go in the order, right? A is higher, C is the second one, C is the third, and
Yeah.
D is the,
that's
A is
correct.
45, B is 33,
yeah.
C is 20, and D is 20 as well. Units per acre.
May I ask some questions now?
Absolutely.
Okay. From my perspective, I think to have the 5-story buildings to max out the density doesn't make sense to me. I don't like the idea of creating such a 5-story, I call it a jungle or whatever you can name it. So I will say that among these 4 alternatives we have, I'll be comfortable with picking the one that meets our requirements for the state for the affordable
Jamil?
housing.
Jamil, can you speak into the microphone, because I can
I,
barely
I
hear
think
you.
I am speaking in the microphone.
Yeah, I can barely hear you here.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you better now. Yeah.
Okay. The thing I was saying is that I don't like the idea of putting the larger number of units in this proposal, because that can lead up to 4 to 5-story buildings, and I don't like that idea to have that in a small town like Brisbane. My thinking is that we should stick with what the minimum required by the state to meet their requirements, and yet we can have a pretty decent proposal that the citizens will like it too, from the perspective that we are not going into a huge municipality here. We like to keep it within the wherever the Brisbane values are. So among these 4, if whichever one will meet the state requirements without creating the masses, the high density units, I will go for that alternative.
Yeah, I think really the question before the commission is, we provide this range of densities. All 4 achieve the
Yes.
the minimum or better. It's just a matter of whether you want to spread it out more over the entire site, which may reduce the city's flexibility on certain areas, or do you want to concentrate it on a few sites, which may increase your flexibility on the remainder. So it's kind of a trade-off situation. I think your point is perfectly legitimate. That's a very reasonable point of view, but that's all we're trying to do is provide a range of different sort of flexibility for the commission to consider when you're doing this. We weren't over-zoning in any of these conditions. Maybe the one where you add the B of A at the minimum density by the state, would over-zone a little bit from our RENA requirements, but the other 3 are just a matter of taking the same basic yield and redistributing it across, different sites.
My understanding may I ask a question? So once it's zoned for 44, it doesn't need to be zoned for 44. It can be lower, right? Or not?
If you zone it for 44, this would be the minimum density, and if I believe you can essentially trade sites. If going in later there was another development that made sense for one of those 2, or in scenario B, 3 sites, you'd have to show the zoning elsewhere in the city then to still provide that minimum density. So somewhere it has to be provided, but the zoning, once once that's set, that would be the intent, is that's the minimum. I should note, I think a compromise between that concern that Commissioner Munir has and the more spread out might be scenario B, where you have 33 units an acre, and I don't think you would need to go up to the maximum height to do that, as you saw from the images that we already have in town. I think it could be a reasonably high building.
And I have it here is it's concentrated in one area versus the one that right now we have, that warehouse building all the way to the end is 5 stories, but rest of the buildings are not, right? But here we're creating a special zone where we will be allowing high density, 44 units or more. So that will create like a clump, cluster of all big buildings. I rather much prefer that we stay with the minimum number that we can satisfy. And if you need the flexibility, it's possible that we can pick some of these areas which are kind of smaller, where we can have 3 or 4 story buildings, which will not create a cluster effect, But larger areas, we can still try to minimize the impact by keeping it in a lower density area. And that way, you will have a flexibility, but also you're balancing it in some ways.
My concern is that another few years passes and they want us to find another 215 more
Well, we
homes,
don't,
and then what?
Then we have to come up with some new sites, But the thing is, in order to worry about what they're going to say in 10 years from now, should we allow 5-story buildings here? That's not. I don't think that's the way I like to approach this thing. And the reality is that no matter what we say here, I don't think in 10 years we will have this density anyway. I don't think that many units will be built. Knowing the past history, in past 10 years we had only 73 units or less were built. So for this one here, my approach is that we should try to minimize the visual impact and cluster effect of those large buildings as much as possible and spread it out on a little larger area.
We're using,
Pardon me?
we're using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sites.
Yes.
We're zoning for 6 sites that are only going to have residential.
Well, I don't know whether you can allow the mixed use also. We can, but depending on the state law doesn't prevent us from having a mixed use, is it?
That's correct. It just can't be more than 50% of the low-income requirement. So we're limited in how much residential can be a component of mixed use.
Yeah, what we have to do is we have to decide the areas that are very, there are certain areas that you can look at it and say, oh, this is a good candidate for mixed use area. The others will be farther away towards Park Lane or that, where it may not be it may not be that viable option. But some things near the shopping malls, existing shopping malls, some of these areas near Old Country Road, they may be a suitable candidate for mixed use.
But if you look at the 1 San Bruno Avenue, it doesn't really have a lot of open space there, but there's certainly a park across the street. I like the idea of having a higher density and having more park area. I think that we could make something quite lovely if we extended.
Well, that particular project, I was part of the commission when we approved this, And I think back, I don't think we should have approved this. It's it's an eyesore looking at it, the design. It looks pretty good in the pictures, but in reality, it doesn't. And you can tell that when you drive through that intersection. But that's not the point here. I think we're trying to get to the
And then
visibility.
the visitation garden actually is pretty nice. It's 39 units an acre.
Yeah, that's nice, yeah. Some of the other ones were very good projects, but that particular one, I don't know how it got through us, but it did.
I don't know, I think we're taking up, does anyone else want to?
You two continue until you're done.
Go ahead.
So, I would much prefer B to C. And I actually think A would work quite well.
Okay.
But if we're going to have something, I prefer that we be able to create more open space.
Yeah, but at the same time, you might create 4 or 5-story buildings, which is, I don't know whether that fits within the, what the citizens are looking for here. Do we need high-story buildings here?
So scenario A would potentially allow for 5-story buildings, correct? Just want
I
to get
think-
this on the record here.
I'm thinking, this would be, the zoning of it would be subject to future discussion by the Planning Commission, ultimately City Council, but I don't think 5-story buildings are necessary for alternative A. I think it could be done in 4 stories.
But there is the potential for 5-story buildings with scenario A, correct?
If the city wants to allow it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you have to keep in mind that you will apply whatever, as an implementation step, you'll apply the zoning standards that you feel are appropriate. If we reduce the height, you put a height cap and you put a certain amount of open space requirement on these kind of zones, if you can't go up, and, you end up maybe with smaller units. So, it's hard to know exactly, we're not designing buildings here, we don't have products, so all we can really give you at this point is sort of a range of, we can demonstrate
Great.
in other projects what kind of densities you can achieve in a 3-4-story format. If you start overlaying different requirements, I mean, at this point, our conversation is going to have to be, at that broader level. No one can guarantee, anything at this particular point in the conversation. That's not what we're trying to achieve.
But the example on 1 San Bruno Avenue is the density is 44 units per acre, and it's only 2 levels with 3 in the back. So it's I think, doable.
Right, I would agree,
It's
and
not too congested looking or too monstrous,
Yeah, it's a good point. I think if you look at the whole table, the 33 sites, and you looked at the number of stories across the board for all those, I only found one site where part of it was a 4-story building. That's at the top of Visitation, the apartment building at the corner of Klamath and Visitation. And in that case, you have the half of the, essentially a parking garage on that downhill slope side rises to 4 stories, but all the rest I found to be 3 stories or less and fairly high density.
See, these 2 projects, I thought that's the kind of
Which 2
Features
projects
are-
are you referring to?
these 2 here. This is the kind of idea I like to promote. If you want to do that, this is the one on the 291, 293 on Santa Clara, and the other one is the one in Loomis. They are 3 stories, but they, will meet the criteria we're looking for, and at the same time, they don't create that big mass that I'm afraid that with the high density, you may wind up with that. And also the fact is that once you allowed, the one way to do will be to put the height restriction. But if you have existing 50 is it 50 feet high right now? And with the density then that we allow, we won't be able to say no to any developer who's going to come up with a 5-story building.
So the height, to be clear, the height, the current limit is at 50 feet. The future height would be what the Planning Commission and ultimately City Council sets it at. So it could be a lower height than, and I should add also that the topography here, vegetation, we actually went up there, Tim and I took a walk up to the top where San Francisco, essentially take the stairs up onto Solano and kind of just trying to eyeball it. And then I took a look at the topography map, and it looks like it's on the order of about 60 feet at that point up there. And then you have it pretty heavily treed along the Old County Road, which separates essentially the R2 district from what we're talking about here. So from that direction anyhow, I don't see that you would have visual impacts. So I think the question becomes how you want, ultimately at the stage of zoning this, how you would want to see that from the street, and then, through the design review process, of course, as well. So.
Glenn? You have any comments?
No, not right now.
Go ahead.
You done?
No.
Well, I'm going to take a step back and look at this as a resident. He's been here for a long time. And make my comments thus. I have a feeling that high density in and around the park, high buildings, clustered development around the park would not be received very well. That's my personal opinion on that. So, A does not look very good to me. I think one of the conversations that we've had, recently was, the potential for trying somehow to enjoin the Northeast Ridge with the city. So from my perspective, and I could be completely, off base with, how the people in Brisbane actually think about this, is that, keeping the density more spread out and taking mixed use, into the industrial park would be a better way to go. So we are not suddenly having this huge, dense, high-rise situation, at the start of town. That's just my gut reaction to this. So, I look at A and I go, if I wasn't on the Planning Commission, I'd be going, I can't see that. B also looks a little too dense for me, and we talked about spreading out, through Park Lane. So, what's the downside of that would be my questions. It's like, what's the downside of not having, more density really close around the park? So can we look at the upsides and downsides of both of those?
Yeah, I think there are a couple. I think there's just, it's a range of options and sort of priorities for the commission. The one issue, I think that, and Ken can speak to this too, is flexibility. To the extent that you load certain portions of that area, and I think what we picked were the areas that we felt were least visually sensitive, least visible, then you provide a lot more flexibility across the remainder of the area shown in yellow in terms of densities and mix of use. And frankly, I think that's the area that's going to need the most massaging or manipulation to really get right. And to the extent that we have some density that's loaded to a different part of that area, we don't have the pressure to achieve a certain density in that mixed-use area. But, it does come at a cost in terms of the visual. Yeah, you have the potential of getting into 4 stories or 3 and 4 in that area. If that's not something the commission's interested in, then we spread the density as it was. There are 2 factors. One is we do still have that limitation on mixed use. So some portion of that site is going to have to be standalone residential one way or the other.
Didn't we have a conversation in one of the previous meetings about, the potential on Park Lane on the west side, beside Old Quarry Road, that, given that there was only so much that was mixed that we could use as the RENA numbers, is that, maybe we had buildings that sat beside each other that looked the same, but in fact, one was strictly residential and the next one was mixed use.
Yeah, I think
we have this conversation?
We did. I don't know if the way it was left in my mind is that was something we'd have to talk to the state about.
Right.
What they define mixed use, and I don't know that staff has had the opportunity to have that conversation. So, I don't think we have a resolution of that. If that's the way we go and that we're the best design, we would certainly pitch it to the state that way, that we're complying and why we're complying. At this moment, I couldn't guarantee you that the state would
Go for it.
agree with that kind of interpretation, but, that's something we can...
I could say why not, but that'd be
Exactly.
a ridiculous question, of course, obviously. So what does the Planning Commission think about that? Remember we had this conversation that, in an ideal world, what I would actually like to see is, some kind of elevation-looking diagrams of A, B, C, and D, because I think that would give our residents a much better picture of what they'd be buying into, and could probably generate some conversation in our meetings relative to, how people feel about what we're doing and where we're moving forward, rather than having a reactionary situation, which we typically have over the last 30 years, to anything that...
I'm sorry, I think we're going to have a reactionary...
Anyway.
Anyway, I think what we need to do is to pick what we think will be best for the city, keeping in mind that the state is going to want more and more and more and more.
And I think we need visuals of what A, B, C, and D would actually look like driving into town.
May I make one comment here?
Of course.
Is it possible that you can divide these different areas into different densities? Like the areas close to the park can be a lower density, but further away on Parkland, you can make it as an A or B or C, so that that farther we go away from the town, closer to the industrial area, then it's possible to have a little bit higher density, but close to the area where most of the city downtown area, we should maintain the low density.
Yeah, I think Ken can run all sorts of scenarios. I think he would need to know 2 things. One is what you consider your upper limit. If you're saying that 40 is too high and 33 are too high, then what is that upper limit? And then mathematically, you can figure out, okay, how much of the site is going to be constrained by a minimum density of 20 units to the acre.
Well, like to give you the example, the farthest one here in this map is...
Which map are you looking at?
The first one. I'm looking at this.
At A? Okay.
Yeah. I'm irrespective of A or B or C. I'm just showing you the area. And this one here is 181. What is it? Total 130 equal, the farthest away. So now if
That would be between Park Lane, Old Quarry Trail.
So for example, that area, we designate that as an possibly A or B.
Have Ken pull up some graphics, maybe make sure we're all clear what you're talking about.
Are we talking about this one out here?
The farthest one, yeah.
Number A.
Yes, it is
Yes, Ken.
irrespective of A or B or C. All I'm saying is
No.
particular parcel.
Yes.
you can make that as an A or B.
The density.
Yeah, and so gradually you can decrease it because that one is very close to the other warehouses and all that anyway. So there will be less impact versus the one that are close to Old Country Road. That should be all maintained to all, low.
I actually think that if we're going to do these scenarios, is that I think the most reaction people are going to have, and it just might be in my head, is that, what does coming into town look like
Yeah.
at 5 stories? What does coming into town look like at 3?
So again, I don't, I think you have lots of examples of 3-story buildings. This list of apartments are 2- and 3-story buildings. 5-story buildings I don't think are necessary at this density. I was answering, I guess, your question in terms of could you do that? And sure, you could. You allow for more yard space and potentially larger living spaces is the trade-off there. But I'm seeing, in town we have these density ranges at 3 stories. So,
I understand that, but you know what? I have to say that I think the reaction to the people in town is going to be, what does our downtown look like when people are coming into town?
I think we should be thinking in terms of people are going to have strong reactions. I mean, if we start building on right next to quarry roads, people are going to have strong reactions. If we're building right at the entrance of town, people are going to be having reactions. I think that the process of the people coming and expressing their opinions is part of the process, and they will be doing that here, and they will also be doing that at the city council meetings. So we'll have plenty of input, but I think right now we should just look at what we think would be best for Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I personally think that if we create areas that can, I think we can have a higher density that looks elegant. We could even have a higher density that, has plenty of park area within that area, and need not look difficult.
Well, the one way to achieve that is possibly that we can have the higher density, but we limit the height so that it limits it to 3 stories. So you don't get a huge tall buildings. So that's possibly if you really want to go for higher density, we should try to minimize but at the same time, we have to decide about the open space and the green area and all that. So there's a compromise here too, and how you're going to do that, that needs a little further study here.
And I think maybe the thing we need to focus on is kind of a 2-step sort of process. One is the housing element policy direction, in terms of these are the sites that we've determined are suitable to achieve our arena numbers. There's a whole subsequent implementation step of designing those zoning standards, which get into building height and setbacks and open space area. We can't turn this housing element into a design charrette for those zoning districts. We don't have the time. We need to get this thing adopted by January. So, I understand you're concerned about you don't want to buy a pig in a poke, and the idea of if you come up with a density you're comfortable with, or you come up with a height, and we reverse. Okay, generally that kind of height will allow, if you really want to limit it to 3-story, I think we'd recommend probably B as opposed to, or is it B? Yeah, B, because of those densities are much more suitable for 3 stories than trying to do, densities of A in a 3-story format. I'd really try to match it up, but the zoning district opportunity, that would be your time to really refine that.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, A is not suitable. I don't know the others, commissioners, what they think. But what about if you do combine B, C, and D and come up with a median or average density? So some areas you will have the B type of density, some areas you will have C, some areas you will have D. and the average will be something in between. Rather than for entire area, we're saying this entire area should be B or this entire area should be C. Why can't we look at it each separately?
You can. I guess the question is if you designate a certain portion of that site as B or C, you're not going to have to designate some portion of it for any density, because we won't need that zoning to meet our RENA number. So then the city has complete flexibility of, it can be 8 to the acre, it could be 6 to the acre,
Right.
it could be in a one-story format.
Yeah.
But by putting 20 across the entire site, that's fine, but that's what you're doing. You're tying your hands in that regard, and if it's a trade-off you want to make, that's fine, that's the commission's choice.
The reason I want to tie my hands is because I'm concerned about the area close to the old county road and Bayshore Boulevard and all that. That should be maintained, and if you want to leave it open, then it's going to be, some developer is going to come up with the idea to build 5-story buildings, and with a 50-foot high line, we will not have much of a case.
No, if we designate it less than 5 stories, then we could still
We are
maintain.
not designating height at this point according to the planning director, because that's part of the other areas. But if in order to meet that, you need to do a lot more studies to see how this area will be impacted if you go with option A.
So the last housing element for the NCRO 3 district, it actually did, and there's a policy in there that refers to 3-story, allowing for 3
I will be more comfortable with that, but I don't know.
And that, I think, is reasonable with scenario B if that's the direction that the Planning Commission wants to make. So I think you can have some kind of policy language in there to address the height.
Question is whether we'd want it there or over close to Old County Road.
No, I mean, according to him, it will be B for the entire, all of these.
No, these 3 areas.
All of them will be B.
No, I don't understand that.
You would not have to designate, if you did B under this scenario, the only properties you would technically have to rezone at the density prescribed are the parcels that are labeled in white.
I see.
All the highlighted area could be at a lower density or whatever density at your discretion. You have no more of a state obligation to meet a 20 unit to the acre minimum.
That's why I'm back to number 1, A. Are you ready to say anything?
Yes, looks like B seemed to be a good compromise.
Yeah, I think A is too congested, personally speaking,
I agree.
because you have 130 units on parcel 1, right? And then next to it is 96 units. If you were just to add a third parcel, you would have 61 units. So you would take, it would be 95, 71, and 61. And it would be more spread out so that you don't have to worry about the danger of having monstrous heights that you have to deal with. There wouldn't be that much need. And also, you would actually be able to include more open space, I think, because even with the 44 example, the one on, where was it? With San Bruno. Yes, the one on San Bruno, that does not include any open space as far as I know. And that's a mixed use, and we're limited to 50% mixed use.
Right.
The rest must be residential. So for me, at minimum, I would say B and not A. But I do understand Commissioner's concern about the fact that we need to think about future requirements
Right.
and not tying our hands and the trade-offs that we're talking about here.
If you look down from Quarry Road, it's quite a bit down. So if you put higher buildings, it's not going to cause a lot of sense
Yeah, but the
of just
But people
this is
driving-
just stacked.
But the people driving in Park Lane and all that would be a big stack of buildings, tall buildings. You're not looking at just at Corey Road. So it's,
I'm interested in why you are, your concern is the old Quarry Road Trail looking down versus,
The way we would be looking from Park Lane?
well, no, just Park Lane, but, around Park Lane and across from there is the basketball courts, the skate park, City Hall, whatever, and looking up and actually physically being part of that. Is there something about Old Quarry Road Trail that I'm not understanding from your perspective here?
No,
No?
no, I'm just
Okay.
trying to see what would be best for Brisbane. And
Sorry.
E might be a good compromise.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't want D.
No, I
And I
Don't think
think
anybody-
C is really restricting us as well
yeah.
to future ideas. I just don't want our ideas, future ideas, to be
Right.
compromised.
So these are just sample scenarios, right? So we can shift the numbers as we see fit. So maybe if we're talking about spreading it out and doing scenario, let's say we do scenario C, we don't have to have 58 in the first and 43 and so on, right? We can shift those
Well-
numbers so that, or is it parcel dependent?
You're parcel dependent, essentially.
And that's why those numbers are where they are right now.
So that's the maximum number per parcel.
Right.
Or the
Maximum number of units.
It would be the minimum.
Oh, the minimum
Right.
number of units per.
Well,
All right.
I'll throw
So
my
we're
2 cents in
agreed
here.
on-
I'll throw my 2 cents in here and say, I like the idea of a mix between B and C just to really confuse everybody.
Yeah, I'm going there too.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I don't like A and I'm not
I don't like A.
crazy
I
about
think
D
that's
because it's
pretty
too
good
far
for
apart.
me.
All right, so we're going to confuse you all now. We would like a hybrid of B and C. Can we
Can we do that?
fix that?
Can you tell me how you would like that hybrid to?
I
No.
think basically C will be in the areas close to the old county road and all that.
Well, here's, I'm trying to put myself on the street right now
Right.
in Park Place, in front of City Hall. I'm in front of City Hall and I'm looking across at the two potential buildings that are here. And I would probably be less offended having higher story buildings there than elsewhere, but I'm not sure. So I think we have to come up with another scenario. We have to come up with a BC combo. And
It's a challenge for Ken.
I hate to be a pain, but we want to get something right. I'm not going to rush an answer just because we need to have an answer. I'm sorry, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Not going to do that.
So in the last housing element cycle, we had a conversation with the state actually after they got the draft, and
Okay.
and the 3-story building policy language. This was at 24 units an acre, which is not that far away from 20 units an acre. Was that they wanted to see that we were going to allow for a minimum 3-story building in this
Okay.
product.
All right, so let's go
Okay.
back to B.
So I don't see much problem with C.
Well, no, actually, we could still ask you to look at a hybrid BC, because B, we've got 33, C, we've got 20. Somewhere in the middle
Maybe
looks
24,
like
25.
something that 3 of the 4 of us here tonight actually like the idea of, and I'm,
So I guess what I'm struggling with is, so C has a minimum density of 20 units an acre
Right.
across the board. So are you looking at the Park Lane sites having something in between 33 and 20 units per acre, and then just essentially picking out one of the parcels on the NCR03 district. And my concern here is essentially spot zoning. The other, because you can't go under 20 in the mixed-use district. That's a
Right.
requirement, or it won't count at all. So we can't go to like 15 and kind of do this compromise. So that's, I guess, my struggle here to find a hybrid.
Okay,
between those two.
all right, so, call me crazy. Let's look at C for a second. And let's look on Park Place. Opposite City Hall, we have, I wish I could have had a designation. There was it says equals 17, equals 19.
Yeah, sorry, I should have had the addresses on there. So
Oh.
the one to the north is 25 Park Place, and the one to the south is 41 to 43.
On the corner of Park Place and Valley Drive.
Corner of Park, okay,
Place
that's
and Valley.
25 Park Place.
That's number what?
That's 25 Park Place is the one at the corner of
Okay,
Valley
Park.
Drive.
Well, see, I could see a higher density on that property, given where it's situated, and it's, it's not in front of the park, and it's, back from, the public's general purview, and also the property directly opposite City Hall right here, same. So that's why I'm sort of asking about the hybrid between B and C. You've got those two properties, and then right behind the post office, on B you've got 61, and on
Ken's going to pull up the graphic, should be up on the screen in front of you, and so we can he'll point out the parcels you're talking about, just so we're all clear,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
So
No,
this,
sorry-
this
sorry to
one
be a
here
pain.
is 25 Park Place.
right,
Okay, and at 20 units an acre, it's at 19 units.
Yep.
This one here is 41 to 43 Park Place, and at 20 units an acre, it comes out to a total of 17 units.
right. And then we go across to, yes, number 37, whatever we call that, yes.
Yes.
Why don't we re-look at those three properties to blend B and C, which looks like might make at least the three of the four of us happier.
So with this
possible?
property, we wouldn't put a requirement on it. We would keep that, maybe zone it, this as a consistent block altogether. That wouldn't be for the state, but would be for just to meet our desires in Brisbane.
I think that
And
would
then
make
housing.
more people happier.
So housing on these two, and reduce the density. So these two would have to stay the same, or go higher, I
Right.
guess. I'm sorry,
Right, go higher,
go higher.
right.
And this one goes lower.
From 61 to somewhere between 61 and 37. And split those three numbers to make it 24, wasn't that what the state said 24?
I don't think
The state minimum is 20.
20.
24 was the number that used to be assigned for the NCR03,
Okay.
and that, we're not tied to that number in any way. It's a new
That might
site.
be a more blendable thing that doesn't,
So what are you thinking, 24 on each of these three?
I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm just saying that kind
How
of
many would that be?
brings the density down a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what are you proposing? I get the idea. I guess the question is, for the area you're interested in looking at an upzoning, are you talking about upzoning that to 24, or what are you talking about for those two parcels that are?
Yes.
So you want to go take those up to 24, and then,
And 61 down to, a 61 on item,
yeah, I understand.
right.
That parcel next to the post office?
Yes.
Down to 24.
Well,
or thereabouts.
Yes,
Something.
though, if we can, does that make sense?
What would be
Yeah.
the crunch
Does that make sense?
on that?
Jamil, you kind of wrote this up at the beginning, and I'm just trying to make sense of this. Does that make sense to you? Does it make sense to
Yeah,
you?
the graduated approach.
Yeah.
So these three would be 24 each.
So we've got a more graduated thing rather than, I don't think anybody in Brisbane's going to like the idea of,
I don't
density
think
and-
we need to do that. There's going to be a lot of public comment.
Yeah,
Once we bring it back, then
Right.
we'll start hearing. But I think we should just,
we're going to hear about it anyway, yeah.
and there'll be a lot of discussion. People will have their opinions. But at this point, I think we need to figure out what would be best for Brisbane.
I think that's what we're trying to do here,
Right.
is
Right.
in terms of trying to minimize
So-
the impact. The main
But
concern,
each of these places would need by necessity to be 3 stories.
yeah,
Well, they are now anyway.
Right.
the 3-story.
They are now, so
Yeah.
that's
They
not
are.
changing.
Visually, 3 stories don't have that much impact, but if you go to
Right,
5, then it.
And then we'd have the parking on the side?
Well, that will be part of the design issue. I
Yeah.
think we don't have to concern about that.
Right.
Through the chair, if we could take about a 5 to 10 minute break, Ken and I can do a little simple math here, just to see if what you're proposing makes any, I mean, you might want to do it anyway, but whether or not we have to zone more or less, if we make these changes, whether it makes any difference in terms of what we're obligated to zone by the state requirements, or if it doesn't make a difference.
Thank you.
So if we could do that.
Yep.
Yeah, but we need coffee and donuts, okay?
Hang on one second. Yeah.
So with my scribble, this is truly a study session here.
Thank you. It's all good.
So I think you can kind of see this is a very rudimentary sketch of those sites. So the ones to the west side at 95 and 71 are both at 33 units an acre, as they are shown in scenario B. If you kept the two mixed-use sites, NCRO 3, you could actually keep them at just 20 units an acre and drop the other site, that one in the middle, down to 20 units an acre also, and meet the numbers with those that way.
So, I'm sorry, I'm confused. So that would be 5 units, 5 parcels?
Five parcels. That's what I was getting from, if I understood the commission's direction correctly. And this is, we can always redo this. So, if you're on the pointer here, so these two stay at 20. This one gets reduced from 33 down to 20, and you still, adding that all up, you exceed the number still for the totals. So that would do it. Staff could go back and actually reduce these, because we are over the total, the 239. What was our total again? 225.
25.
So the 33 units an acre in this scenario overall, we could actually reduce those to 33 units an acre to something in between. It might be 30 or whatever, but we can bring that back if this is the general direction that the Planning Commission wants to go. We could bring that back to the commission with the complete element, essentially, if that's.
I don't see much difference between 30 and 33.
What are you talking about?
Well, then I'm very confused. So you're saying that, can you go through this again? I'm confused.
So, because this is picking up both scenarios B and part of scenario C,
Okay.
you can eliminate the STIR site, the 125 Valley Drive, keep the other 2 Park Place sites, keep them at 20 units an acre, and drop the first Park Lane site down also to 20 units an acre.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you keep those other 2 sites at currently they're shown at 33, it might be something more like 30 or 31 or something that would be the actual ending number if we wanted to get as close as we could to the state's requirement without exceed,
I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Makes a lot of sense to me, too.
But then we're using 5, then we're rezoning for 5 parcels.
The other one is still the one,
No.
the old county road.
Right. I am comfortable with that compromise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what about the old county road site, that one,
The post office site?
post office and rest of it, the whole.
So those you would address independent. You would have the policy within the housing element to consider rezoning for those sites, but it would not be to meet the RENA numbers. It would be to meet the city's desires strictly.
That's pretty good then.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best of the old world.
Okay. I totally disagree.
Okay,
I think we should use the least amount of parcels possible.
that means that we've got a
Then
higher density.
we'd have a higher density.
And I think we would get a huge kickback from the residents. I really do.
think we should think about what will be best for the city. And I think taking 5 parcels to meet a RENA requirement is something that we don't want to do.
Why not?
Because we can use this other land in other ways. At some other point, we can figure out what we want to do with it. But if we just use the minimum amount of parcels, 2 or 3, to meet a state requirement, I think it's better. And 33 units in that particular area is not going to really, it's not going to look bad.
I still don't understand your objection.
I don't either.
Carolyn.
I actually feel that the bigger density around the park is going to be an issue for people, and I don't think that is in the best interest of the city to be within keeping of the small town feel. I think if we have this huge density around the park, that takes away from our small town feel. I think spreading it out a little bit to these industrial buildings, from my perspective, is going to be much more appealing, but that's not for us to make that decision because it's going before the city council. They make the choice. Then the citizens actually, let me finish. Then the citizens get to say their thing. I think for us to propose high density around the park is not okay, and I'm good with what Ken said. I don't understand your perspective, Caroline.
I think the way they can mention that, I think if with these 3 parcels we satisfy the state requirement, 5, why not? Just go with it.
There are some, I think, legal questions that this may raise that we might have to, as the next pass, and just kind of check in with the city attorney in terms of kind of this.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
What are you thinking? Just so we understand where your head's at on that, the legal questions.
I have a couple concerns. One is, the idea of an individual, a zoning density that applies only to one parcel that's not necessarily contiguous, and maybe we could work around that. I guess my other is more of a practical concern is, if these properties were to be developed, the Park Lane properties, my expectation is they wouldn't be developed as 3 individual parcels someone would acquire, because they're all under single ownership now. Mm-hmm. I would suspect they'd be built as a consolidated project, not 3 projects. So I'm not sure what that would mean in terms of density. Now you'd have density attributed to only a partial part of a project, and that gets a little interesting to.
Well, doesn't this whole thing get a little interesting anyway? I mean.
Well, it certainly does. There's no doubt about it. So these are all just things I'd want to. Nothing that's to me is a deal breaker, but it's just something we want to consult with the city attorney on, and sort of that scenario. I'd like to run through a what-if scenario. What if these were combined? What would that do to the density? I guess as long as the minimum number of units, and if you put design standards that relate to. I don't know if you're planning on putting different height standards on this parcel. It's just a little unusual to treat that one parcel. I understand that you're transitioning, that stepping is what you're trying to achieve. Is in my own mind, I need to figure out a regulatory scheme. I don't need to do that tonight, but it is something that I want to have a handle on what a regulatory scheme is that actually
isn't part of this
achieves your goal.
exercise for us to come up with the numbers for the state. That's the first criteria, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we come up with the numbers, we figure out the other stuff later.
Yeah, and if there's any legal issue, we'll make sure that's captured when this whole document comes back to you in its entirety.
If we went with parcel number A, then we are not that close to the park. And then we can create
What is number A?
back to the 45 units an acre.
Where is number A?
The very A, these two.
Yeah, I think these five are the one that Ken is talking about, right?
All right.
Three
well,
plus two.
I really disagree with everyone, and I think I've been over, no one agrees with me, so.
Well, do we have to take a vote on this, or what? How does it work?
No, we're just making a recommendation. I mean,
Yeah, so what-
this is not in stone. This just,
So what we can do is, you can, your notes, you can put down the three commissioners, they like this, and one commissioner.
think somewhere different. I
Something
mean,
different.
what's-
Yeah, although we'll certainly put that in the body of the staff report, but the draft document that you'll see in its entirety will reflect the prevailing.
prevailing thoughts of
And
the,
obviously, the commission as a whole, you can revisit it because you'll have a crack at the whole thing. If you change your mind, that's certainly your prerogative.
Right.
But we're not going to provide, in the document, we're going to provide basically a proposed rezoning.
Right.
right, and I mean, you could come back with information that spins us on our head, and we all think that, another answer is correct.
well, I do want to say, the reason I keep saying that we need to think about what's best for the city is because last time we made recommendations, by the time I got to the city council, they made another entirely different recommendation. The city to infill within downtown Brisbane. What they did, the citizens decided they didn't like it at all, and so the compromise was to put it on Bayshore. So, I think what we need to do is to figure out what's best for the city, and what would be the least impact.
That's what we're trying
And
to do
That's what
here.
we're doing.
I'm just stating that.
And the thing is, the city council still has the option to come up with a new,
Right.
altogether new ideas, But this is our recommendation to them, and if they like it, fine. If they don't like it, they can come up with their own,
And what's best for the city is,
what we're looking at here.
is that a personal opinion of what's best for the city? I mean, I'm trying not to put my personal opinion in here at all. I wouldn't have any of this. I mean, what's best for the city, from my perspective, is what I feel is best for the citizens of the city,
Correct.
not the state. And I'm trying to think, what's the citizens would think would be the best, not the state. That's my thought.
My question is, why did the state reduce the numbers this time? I mean, the last time they gave us quite a number of numbers, and then this time they just added a few more.
I think it's the 2007 element was very tightly driven by jobs housing balance, and as we know, Brisbane is jobs rich and housing poor, and the regional goal was to try to equalize that. So if you had a lot of jobs and a few housing units, you took a much higher proportion. So that was the 2007 thought. The latest RENA is all based on sustainable community planning, which is transit-based housing by transit, housing that can be served in that regard. And frankly, since the Baylands was in planning process, ABAG left the Baylands out of the discussion and didn't attribute anything to the Baylands site. So this was basically for the remainder of Brisbane, the Baylands, they'll look at that some other day once the city makes an entitlement, and whether they think we're on base or off base or whatever, that'll come home to roost another time. But that was basically out of play at this particular housing element.
Okay. So I think we're done with it, no?
Have we beaten this horse right now? Any other comments?
Next item.
Carolyn?
No.
Okay. Stuff, anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think we have our direction on this. Thank you.
All right.
Don't
Okay.
look confused now. Don't look confused.
Do I look confused?
That's why I asked the question. Looked like you needed to ask a question. Okay, so then moving on to item G, items initiated by staff.
Just to get some clarification on the summer schedule, I know Ken sent out an email. Commissioner Reinhardt will be absent in the next meeting. Commissioner Cunningham will be absent the first meeting in August,
August 14th.
August 14th.
Yes.
I haven't heard back, so.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I responded and I was
Yes,
okay with all
okay,
of that.
that's right.
My response was the sooner we could get the schedule together on everything, the better, because my personal business schedule is crazy.
So based on scheduling, I think we'll just keep our, unless Commissioner Munir has any travel plans that,
I do have, but it changes all the time. I'm very tired.
okay.
Whenever you feel like going somewhere, you go.
Okay.
But most of the time, I try to make it to the
Okay.
meeting, like today.
Yeah, I would think that as long as you have 4, I mean, I don't know if you'd want to cancel if you were only down to having 3. That would be kind of the commission's discretion at that point. But as of now, we'll have 4 for the next, all the remaining meetings in July and August. So we would just keep a regular schedule unless the commission feels otherwise at this point.
You have any comments?
Let's go with the schedule that you, and if there is any changes, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Carolyn, any comments?
But these guys are professionals, so they already have the schedules ahead of time, but I don't have to worry about my schedule. So hopefully we will have a quorum when I'm not here.
Okay. All right. Was that all, John? Okay. Okay. Any items initiated by the commission?
No.
No.
This is not really relevant, but I'm going to say it publicly anyway. At 2:34 this afternoon, I heard a very low and very loud rumbling on the west side of San Bruno Mountain. I just arrived home from a meeting, and I was kind of looking around everywhere, wondering what on earth was going on. And the rumbling got louder and lower, and just over the crest of San Bruno Mountain came a KLM 747, barely cresting our mountain. And as it went over my house, every brand new window in my house rattled, and I could read very clearly all of the numbers without my glasses on of the identification of the KLM jet that went over our house, probably less than 1,000 feet over my home. So anybody out there who's got any pull needs to be at the FAA and making some very serious complaints about how they're handling these runway
I think the
closures.
problem,
This is not very good. This was a very close call this afternoon. It was really bad.
the problem I have is that wasn't there a compromise made with the city when we didn't agree with FAA, and there was a compromise made. Can't we have the city attorney look into this and talk to them, because our rep at the FAA meetings, I don't think they're going to get anywhere, because the federal governments, they have the ultimate say. But in this particular case, we went to the court and we have the certain things within the decision, as I recall, that FAA has to abide by. How come we are not going after the FAA with the help of our attorney and bring this case rather than attending those meetings, which doesn't seem to get anywhere?
Well, we've got 2 runway closures right now for the entire summer.
Right.
And so the north-south runways, which normally fly over Brisbane all the time, are closed for the entire summer while they do repairs to those runways. So most of the planes are doing the east-west runways, but they are supposed to be clearing before turning over San Bruno Mountain. This was a very bad situation this afternoon that that 747 could have landed on San Bruno Mountain. So we don't have a say in what they're doing with their departures, but I'm just making it public that it was a very close
I
call,
don't know
very
what,
bad.
I don't know what the agreement was made and what's the enforcement of that, because I know that other cities went along and I think they paid for the triple glazed windows and all that. We didn't go with that, and we had the agreement. And why we are not making the FAA comply with that? You know, I don't understand. It's been going on for so many years now, and it's continuing to go on unless we really set our foot and say, what are we going to do with this?
So actually, a lot of people have been working on this for a lot of times,
Yeah.
and
But legally, we can take any steps because the decision was made and by the court. And why can't we go after that decision and say this is what the court you agreed to in a court decision? Why we are not getting the city attorney involved? I don't know. I'd like to add one more comment to it, if I may. I did go to Sacramento today, and I was talking to them. There are a couple of new, big projects. Talking to the planning people over there. There are a couple of nice big projects that they are working on about the redoing the downtown area, certain parts of the downtown and certain parts of the Sacramento East Side. We might be interested to contact them and see what they're doing, because that might help us. Some of the cities are aggressively doing that, and Mountain View is another one. They are doing that on the El Camino Real extension, so which is really interesting because it's closer to like Bay Shore now. That's what we're trying to do here. The El Camino Real project is and I get the invitation to go to that one. Unfortunately, I haven't been to one yet, but it might be interested for you guys to keep,
there's one other thing. Is anybody on any subcommittees?
No.
Our Green Building Ordinance Subcommittee is about to reconvene, correct? So that should be something exciting for us to look forward to in the next month or two. And again, if we could get that schedule out sooner rather than later, because my schedule fills up on a daily basis, that would be great. And if there's no other comments?
I do have a question. What is the status of the DEIR?
The final EIR is being prepared now, and I wouldn't expect that's going to be published until the late fall at this point. That'd be my estimate.
Okay.
So the hearings will not be until next year sometime.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Any other comments? Then I propose that we adjourn.
You make a motion.
I make a motion to adjourn for the regular meeting of July 24th, 2014 at 7:30 p.m.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, and good night.